Justice Fiscal Year 2020 Building Strong Grant Applications Online Workshop. My name is Christina, and I will be your moderator for today. Our presenters today will be James Smith from the Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women, and Justine Sudo from the National Criminal Justice Training Center of Fox Valley Technical College. Starting our webinar today will be our first presenter, James. Go ahead, James.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to talk a little bit about the history of CTAS. Started in 2009 as an idea, and it came to fruition in 2010. Over the years, there's been a range of purpose areas. Last year, we saw 10 purpose areas for the first time. This year, we're seeing 8. The offices that are participating this year are the Bureau of Justice Assistance, COPS Office, Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, Office of Justice Programs, Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency and Prevention, Office for Victims Against Crime, and the Office on Violence Against Women, OVW. We also get some assistance from time to time. Can you go back to the first slide, please? We also get assistance from time to time from the Office of Tribal Justice, OTJ, and the Executive Office of United States Attorneys, EOUSA. Next slide, please. The primary focus of CTAS, we heard concerns from Indian country and the tribes way back in 2010 about having a lot of solicitations due at one time. And so our way of addressing that was to come up with kind of like a one-stop shop. It's not perfect, but we've worked and refined it this year. Every year we're doing that. And so the main goal was to increase access to tribes for funding, have everything in one spot so you're able to get that and you can kind of work on a comprehensive application at one time. I think this year we've definitely met that goal. We've streamlined the application a lot. In previous years, it's been almost 100 pages. This year, we've gotten it down to 53 pages, and we've also reworked a lot of the templates to make it kind of easy and straightforward and kind of a situation where you only have to plug in information. Next slide. Critical review of the solicitation. Are you eligible to apply? So we always get that question, and as you all know, the solicitation is open to tribal consortium, but federally recognized tribes, but those designees that are representing federally recognized tribes, tribal consortia or consortiums. So definitely those are folks who are eligible to apply. Can you realistically complete this application by the deadline? You absolutely can. This is one of the reasons why this webinar is put together, to assist you in that. I would also add that the solicitation came out December 4th. It closes February 25th, but that does not mean that you should wait until the last 2 weeks. You should take this application or the solicitation and go through it and start to map out things and plot out deadlines so that you can absolutely apply by the deadline. We often also get what is required to submit an application. There are a number of things that come up or create a complete package, but the main things I will touch on: you need a tribal community and justice profile. You need a purpose area narrative for each purpose area in which you're applying for. You need a budget detailed workbook to include a budget narrative. And if you are applying for the COPS purpose area, within that is a demographic form as well, but that demographic form is only required for the COPS office. In addition to that, you need to submit an application cover sheet, which will include like an abstract for each purpose area that you're applying for. And we have detailed instructions on an application cover sheet, but those are kind of the main things. There are some things that you have to submit as well that aren't these key items, and such things could include, resumes for key staff. It could include things, we may ask you, I know for OVW, you have to submit our 10 pre-award risk assessment questions. For other purpose areas, you have to do the financial capability questionnaire. If you are a designee or a tribal consortium, then you need to submit a signed tribal resolution, which is something new this year. We required it for everyone, but this year we're only requiring it for designees and consortiums. There could be other things that you need to submit as well. So I would encourage you to look at each program in the solicitation for detailed requirements on additional items outside of those things that I named. Where do I call if I need help? So there's several different things. Within the solicitation, I would say your first line of defense is to contact the response center, and there's a phone number for there. The response center has all the application and supporting materials for the solicitation, and they're equipped to answer basic things. They also have a list of purpose area contacts. So if your question is more technical in nature or more detailed into the programmatic aspect, they can refer you to the person in charge of each of those programs to get you more detailed information. If you are having technology issues, there's a phone number and email address for the GMS help desk. GMS stands for the Grants Management System, which is what you will use to apply for CTAS. And so they are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even during holidays, and there's detailed information in there. I would encourage, though, if you do need to contact them for any reason, that you help all of us out, yourself, us, and the GMS help desk, by being very detailed. State your full name, give your full phone number, your full email address, why you were calling, what issues you were having, what tribe you're from. All of that really helps us if we have to check back on things later, and it helps you too. Another question we often get is, what are the key components of a proposal? And I think that could change depending on who you talk to, but I would say for the purpose of CTAS, there's a couple things that are kind of key. Some of them I've already mentioned, but I will mention again. So you definitely want to have a strong project narrative. And by project narrative, we just mean for whatever program you're choosing to apply for, whether it's 1 or 5 different programs, you want to have a strong narrative for each program. You want to state your case. That is very key. You also want to make it known that you are eligible and that you meet the eligibility requirements. That's key. Your budget is key, and your budget and your project narrative matching up and being to sync with each other are very key. And any other little documents that we may ask for, like I said, if you are a tribal designee, I would hate for you to spend all of that hard work and don't provide us a resolution or can't get one, and your application wouldn't be able to move forward. So just think about that. And we'll talk about a little bit more of those things a little later, but just surface level, what will the proposal be evaluated on? Well, the proposal will be evaluated on how closely you meet the needs of what the programs are trying to address. Each component or piece of the application that is due has certain percentages on it, and so those are documented for you to be in justice profile. It's worth 30% of your application. The project narrative is 50%. The timeline is 5%, and the budget workbook is 15%. And so you want to pay attention to those, because those are key things that affect your score. And we'll be looking for completeness. We'll be looking for how well you answer the questions or address the questions that each program is asking in their purpose area template. We'll also be looking at your tribal community and justice profile to see how good you state the overall need and problem and the overall need for your tribe to have funding and how that all ties back. Next slide, please. I want to spend a few moments just talking a little bit about kind of the timeline of how you should think about this when you're putting it together. So, of course, whenever you do any solicitation or apply to any RFP, there's going to be a number of things due. And you wouldn't be doing yourself any favors if you wait to the last minute. Especially, I know with tribes, some things you have to put before your council or your tribal chairman. So it can take a long time to get certain things. For example, if you are a designee, you should be working on getting your tribal authority to apply now. I wouldn't wait for the last minute. If you've never applied for any of our grants before, and so you're not registered in GMS, although we recommend that you do that 2 weeks before at the latest, I would encourage that you go ahead and set that up now. Do your SAMS registration now. Get your DUNS number if you don't have one. Those are all things that are very simple, but that could take a very long time. Negotiating your indirect cost agreement. If you don't have a current one, sometimes those things can take 1.5 to 2 years. Start working on that as well. Resumes or job descriptions, you can start to develop those things now. Draft MOUs. If you need letters of support, those are all things that are easy things to kind of get, and you can start those now. And that way, when you get further down the road, when you get into writing your narrative and doing your budget, the more complicated things, you'll have the easy things out of the way so that they don't take away from your attention, the focus on the more complicated things. Next slide, please. Of course, you want to create your tribal community and justice profile. your budget, your purpose area narratives, and your timelines. Make yourself a little timeline for how long you want to spend on each of these things. And so you might want to say, okay, I'm going to spend 2 weeks on the tribal community and justice profile. Write that, send that off to your peers to look at, then start your budget. Do that, make sure that the budget and the narrative match out. You want to work on your narrative, your overall timeline for your project. I do want to spend a little time talking about that. I will say a lot of folks look at the timeline because it's only 5% and say that it's not important. I would dispel that rumor and let you know that it's very important because it lets each office know how serious you are about implementing this. It lets us know if you even think it's possible, if your project will be implemented, or if it can. So your timelines need to be very clear. Who is doing what? Who's responsible for what task? Different milestones, goals. It needs to be very clear. And if at any point you change your project later, those timelines need to be updated. Your narratives. This is your opportunity to tell your story in a way that relates to the questions that we ask. I would ask you to take a lot of time on that. Don't rush through it. Your budget narratives. A lot of times applicants do a great job of putting together a budget in terms of things that they're asking for and getting the quotes and things. That's only half the battle. If you really want us to approve these things, we need concrete justification for why these things are needed. If I see 20 computers in your budget and you don't mention anything in your narrative about how the computers are going to support your program and what they're needed for, I might question why you need 20. So just think about it in that standpoint. And it wouldn't just be me. I'm only representing the OBW purpose area, but I can tell you how others would look in other offices as well. Next slide, please.
Just to comment on that, James,
Sure.
this is Justine. I so agree with the advice you just gave the applicants. One thing is for sure too, if you're making changes in your budget, make sure that you go back to the timeline and make sure that those changes are reflected also. So the peer reviewers will look at what you've budgeted for, and it should be reflected in the narrative what that money is for, and anything that you're going to do with that, it should be clearly explained in the narrative and also in the timeline. So there should be that connection between activities and what's being budgeted for in the timeline is something that could actually stand alone for anybody in your community. If you were to hand them that timeline, they should be able to implement that project based just on the information alone from the timeline.
Thank you, Justine. I would also like to add one other thing. You can stay on the slide, but I'm just going to say one other thing related to that. So I want to say 2 years ago on the budget workbook form, we added a spot where you would add the point of contact that's for the budget. So at any point after you submit your application and we accept it, if we have any questions during the review process about the budget, we want to be able to reach out to someone and talk about that. So think very clearly who you're going to list on the budget. Ideally, I would think it's the person actually doing the budget. And we know that there's a lot of turnover sometimes. And so if at the time that your application is submitted, between closing, if someone changes, or even after the application closes, if at any point that point of contact that you listed for the budget has changed, you should contact the response center and get in touch with the purpose area contact for each one of the purpose areas you applied to and let us know who the new budget contact or POC is, because we will often have questions for those folks. And not even just for the budget POCs, if any of your POCs change, if your chairman changes, let us know that. It's very good that we have the most up-to-date information. Outline for, so it's always good whenever you're doing anything. I know some of you, if you think back to your college days or grad school days, whenever you wrote a paper or a thesis or anything important along that line, or even an essay, you kind of started out with an outline. And so I would encourage you to do the same kind of thinking here to a certain degree. You want to get all the materials that are needed, the solicitation, the quick user application guide that we created for you this year. You want to get the purpose area templates, all the documents that you are going to need to help you start this application. You want to get them all together and just kind of go through what you may need. Any resources, like if you need stats and statistics, you should be gathering that stuff now. You should create like a Word document with different file names so like if you're working on your statistics, you may want to create a Word document that says statistics for FY20 CTAS application, and you have all your statistics in one place. We include a checklist in the solicitation for you to use. I would encourage you to highly use that as you're going through, especially when you're getting done, and make sure that you have covered all your bases. I would say you want to give the entire solicitation in your application 120%, but definitely the key parts like the budget, the purpose area narrative, and the tribal community and justice profile in your abstract. And let me concentrate on the abstract for 1 second. I have to admit that being a grant program manager and oftentimes reviewing applications, one of the pet peeves for me is that I often feel like a lot of grantees don't take the abstract seriously. They just look at it, it's like, oh, I'll write a sentence or two, or they'll completely ignore the instructions that are there and write something that doesn't make sense. This year, we are being very strict about the abstract. The abstract is included in the application cover sheet. It needs to follow those samples that are there. We went out of our way to make sure that we were very helpful for you in terms of putting, text that pretty much all you have to do is fill in things. We tried to make it as easy as possible for you because we know that doing a grant application is a lot of work. So we came up with kind of language that's helpful to both us and you in terms of what we need to see. So I implore each of you to take the abstract very, very seriously. It's our way of if our leadership asks us very quickly, what is this tribe's focus for their application? Instead of us having to go through your project narrative, we can look at your abstract and get a really good, strong sense of what it is that you want to do. And each one of our office directors, when we turn in our funding recommendations list for who we're thinking about funding out of the pool of applicants, they ask for abstracts to see. So I want you to know that it's not just us reading them, it's also our leadership, and we just don't ask for them for the sake of asking for them. It's really to help us get a good, quick sense of what your project is. So just take that very seriously. And if there's any questions about how to go about doing that, any of you are certainly welcome to reach out to me at any point. Next slide. And so this is kind of an example of a checklist that you could create for yourself, or you could take the one that we gave you in the solicitation. But checklists are very helpful. You know, I'm a very detailed person myself, but I still refer to a checklist. Even the best of us sometimes will forget things in a rush. And so that's why it's good to have all your T's crossed and all your I's dotted. Next slide. You know, there's a timeline that's kind of an obvious timeline, right? Like you know that the solicitation closes on February 25th, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done by then. I would say taking the very obvious timeline, create your own timeline to get you to our deadline and timeline is the way that you should think about that. Planning, you know, being proactive will help you. I will say I've met some wonderful grant writers and some wonderful tribal staff that are great at doing these things, but it's always best to have a team approach. You know, the person doing the budget and the person doing the narrative should absolutely talk. They both should know what they both have created. They should be working together. No way should, whenever possible, I know some tribes are very small and resources are very small and some tribes are very big. So when I say this, I'm saying it in a whenever possible, it's always better to have a team approach and not just one person. But certainly I understand, you know, communities and environments are different. So however you need to get it done, you know best. But I just tell you, it takes a lot of pressure and stress off of one person if there's a couple of people working on this. And I would say the same if you have a couple of people reviewing it. We're all biased to our own writing. We could read something 100 times and never catch a mistake. So it's always good to, you know, let someone else review your work. So you want to build that into there. And then you also want to think about whenever you're writing a grant application, you want to think about, okay, this grant isn't going to last forever. These funds aren't going to last forever. What are we doing for the future? And what are we doing to be able to sustain this if we don't get another round of grant funds? And as a grant manager, we like to see that. That goes a long way and knowing that you are serious about the grant funds and making your projects work. If you're already thinking past what happens once you get the grant funds, that really says a lot. So I encourage you to do that. Next slide. Questions to ask. Does the strategy meet and address the issue? So a lot of folks are really good at writing lots of things, but sometimes what they write don't address the questions that we ask. Nowhere should you ever answer a question that you wish we had asked instead of the question that we actually asked. So, if you need clarity on any of the purpose area narrative templates, please reach out to the response center and they can get you in touch with the person that created that so that we can make sure that you understand exactly what each office is asking. Also, in answering the question and saying what your outcomes and goals are, is what you writing going to be realistic? Is the project that you're proposing going to be realistic to the goals that you want to accomplish, the issues that you want to solve? That's a very real thing to think about. Like I said, you can have a great application that doesn't turn into a viable project because it sounds great on paper, but when you read it, it's like, is it realistic? So you want to think not only good writing, but is the project realistic? Is it attainable? Is it attainable within the resources that you have available? Is it attainable with the amount of money that you get? What happens if you ask for $900,000, but you only get $450,000? What's your backup plan for that? Also, if you are asking for funding in multiple purpose areas, how are those lining up? If you are asking for a cop from OVW, but uniforms for that cop from the cop's office, is what happens if you don't get funded by the cop's office? So just things to think about when you're writing this. Next slide.
Great, and now we have a poll question. Can we go ahead and launch poll question number 1? The question is, what part of the grant writing process do you find most difficult? The options are overall grant narrative, goals and objectives, budget detail and budget narratives, identifying performance measures, and page limitations and writing concisely. As you can see, the majority of respondents responded with identifying performance measures at 30%, budget detail and budget narratives at 24%, overall grant narrative and page limitations writing concisely at 17%, and 11% indicated goals and objectives. Okay, and with that, we'll turn it back over to you, James.
Thank you. I'm going to talk very briefly about the budget process, as we are actually going to have a detailed webinar that deals solely with the budget. I believe the date is January 8th. If I'm wrong, I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to correct me, but I believe it's January 8th at 1 p.m. So just know that I'm going to fly through this, but we will be having a detailed budget webinar where you can really get into that kind of stuff. So I guess the biggest thing to think about when you are doing the budget is making sure that your costs are reasonable, allowable, and they make sense. Just don't, if we see 20 computers at $5,000 per computer, that's going to be unrealistic because we know that you can get great computers for much cheaper than that. We're also going to ask, are you asking for desktops or laptops? If some of your staff is in the field and their position makes sense to be in the field, then a laptop makes sense for them. But if it's someone who just sits at a desk all day long, a desktop is a lot cheaper and makes a lot more sense for them because they're not traveling around. So just, things like that to think about when you're doing a budget. Next slide regarding budget, please. You definitely want to think about the big categories, your personnel, any personnel that you're requesting. Have you listed them in your purpose area narrative so that we understand what they're going to be doing? Fringe benefits need to be detailed. Any travel costs need to be broken down and make sense. I know for OVW, we have 3 mandatory travel and training kind of requests that you have to include in your budget. If you are applying for Purpose Area 5 and you are if you're an Alaskan or Alaska tribe, you have to automatically include $35,000. If you are from the lower 48 and not Alaska, it has to be $30,000. And in both of those amounts, you have to account for new grantee orientation, the annual tribal summit, and the biennial sex trafficking conference. And starting in 21, for the 21 solicitation, we are probably going to be adding the Alaska Implementation Workshop, which is a workshop that for any tribal government grantees, Purpose Area 5, once you get an award, we have it every year to focus on really giving our Alaska grantees that in-depth TA that they need. So moving back to the budget, any equipment, it needs to make sense. Just don't ask for things because it sounds nice. It's like, do you really need these things? Are they justified in your budget? The same with supplies. Any subawards and subcontracts, we are all for that. We recognize that all expertise doesn't always lie in one place. And so a lot of times you have to subcontract out and consult. We are all for that. It just needs to make sense and be lined up and outlined in both your budget narrative and your budget. Indirect costs, I can't tell you enough how important those indirect cost agreements are. Don't have a current rate, and so you'll have access to all your funds once your budget gets approved, except your indirect costs until we get that rate. So just think about that. Those are things that you could be working on now. Next slide. Budget category, again, just making sure that things make sense. Narratives need to be detailed. Each position, and if you know the actual name of the employee already or who you're thinking it's going to be, it's okay to list that. That actually shows us that you've been very proactive in doing a lot of thinking about your positions and what you need. The other thing I would say too, I know that a lot of times a lot of applicants will apply. For example, I'll give you an example. If you are applying for an advocate, right, and your advocate is going to spend 50, and you're applying for OVW and you're applying for OBC, and let's just say your advocate is going to spend 50% of their time working on your OBC grant and 50% of their time working on your OVW grant. That's completely allowable, but how you need to list it in your budget, it needs to say that person's name and that they're going to be at 50%, and it needs to say clearly in the narrative that 50% of their time is going to be devoted to this, and it has to be things that are allowable and acceptable in your OVW grant, and the other 50% have to be things that are allowable and acceptable in your OVC grant, and then it needs to be at 50% of their time in there too. Next slide, please. Fringe benefits, again, just making sure you're accounting for those things very clearly and being detailed. Next slide. Travel, again, travel requirements are different for each office. I will say, I listed the things that you definitely will need to account for OVW. And then for a lot of the other offices, there's the main CTAS new grantee orientation that you will have to account for, with the exception of OVC, because they do their own thing. But yeah, just keep those kind of things in mind. And you're always welcome to contact the response center to be able to get in touch with the purpose area POCs for each purpose area to ask if there's any other additional kind of things that you should account for in your travel. Next slide. Equipment my biggest thing about that is it just needs to be reasonable. Our goal is never to make life difficult for you or to dispel that you don't need something, but it's hard for us to say we're okay with you having something if you just have an item and a cost listed, but it's not supported in any way. There's no justification in your budget narrative, or it doesn't relate back to your project narrative. So just think about those things whenever you're asking for equipment and supplies. You can go to the next slide. Construction, think very clearly about that. For most of the purpose areas, construction is not allowed. I know that Purpose Area 4 has done some new things regarding that, so just take a look at what their section actually asked, and before you put those kind of renovation and construction costs in, you have to think about it if it's allowable. In most cases, it's not, but Purpose Area 4 has a little bit of flexibility in terms of some things that can be done that aren't actually new construction. Subawards and consultant rates, just make sure that you stay within those rates and what they are, and that it's very clear what your subcontractor is going to be doing. But remember, when you subcontract awards, you are still ultimately responsible for, the reporting, any of the requirements that you sign off on your special conditions. You, as the person being awarded, are actually still responsible for that. And the same applies for someone who is applying as a designee. Say you have, and I'm totally making this example up, but say you have Yurok Tribe, and Yurok Tribe has someone else applying as a designee on their behalf. Yurok Tribe would still be responsible for all of reporting and all those things that are due, even though someone else submitted an application on their behalf. So just think about that as you're preparing for this process. And again, my example was no way a realistic example for UROC. It was just an example to give you a way to think about this. And in the other category, I would just say, use that category here and there for things that may not make sense in other categories, but I definitely wouldn't want to see supplies and things that are obviously equipment in the other category when there's categories for supplies and equipment. Indirect cost, again, just make sure you're using your current rate or the de minimis rate if you need to. There's instructions on the solicitation about that. We'll have a whole budget webinar about that where you can get into more of that. Kind of a few things to remember. There's one workbook for our purpose areas, but each purpose area has its own tab. Again, your budget narrative should be very clear, and the budget and the narrative should relate back to your tribal narrative, just, your purpose area narrative, to make sure that those things are in sync with each other. Be sure that you read the solicitation very clearly and that you are covering things that we need. Distinguish costs for subawards from procurement contracts, and definitely include a copy of your current indirect cost agreement. And we understand that your agreement could change from the time that you submit your application, so after, that's fine. Just make sure that as soon as you get a new rate, we know about it. At this point, I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Justine. Justine, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you for the good advice, James. I think so much of what you said is highlighting some of the criteria that is in the solicitation. As a peer reviewer in the past, the things that you highlighted are so often mistakes that I've seen in review of the applications. So I'm really happy that you were able to point those things out, like travel, for example. I'm surprised at how many times it's in the solicitation what the applicant is supposed to budget for, and then I don't see that in the budget. And I think it's because we get so concentrated and focused on the program aspect of what it is that you want to do, and it's something really exciting to do, to see that kind of hope for improving your community. But then those solicitation requirements are there too, and they just cannot be ignored.
Absolutely.
Were there any questions on that part of preparing for an application and responding to CTAS before we go into more of an action planning discussion? And while you're thinking about questions, I just want to point out that in the handout section of your dialog box, you will have a workbook that I will be working out of as examples for the next coming slides. There's also a case study. I might not refer to the case study as much, but you will see when you have time to go back and reference it that the case study does have some examples of how you might respond to different aspects of the workbook that I will be going over here in a moment.
Thank you, Justine. And just as a reminder, there will be a budget development webinar on January 8th, and that is at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, that's 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we
Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome. And we don't have any questions quite yet at this time.
Okay, we're going to move forward then to action planning. And the reason why we spend time on action planning is because this is the part of your grant writing process that you'll spend the most time in preparing your grant application. It's that purpose area specific narrative. And what the peer reviewers are going to see are your responses to those questions that are in the templates that are available on justice.gov/tribal. You will follow all of those templates, but these kinds of exercises that I'll take you through will help you to be able to better respond to those questions with a very clear, succinct way, so that the peer reviewer will know without a doubt that you know where your challenges lie and you know how you're going to respond to those challenges. So for any kind of action planning, there are 3 things to consider here in developing that plan, and that is your community. What are your community needs and desires that are driving you to want to make these justice system improvements? And it's really important to focus also on your community's customs and traditions that are specific to your tribe, because these are where a lot of your strengths lie. And these are aspects of healing and balance for your community that you can incorporate into your plan or your purpose area narrative. Think about what the mission is of what you're trying to accomplish for the benefit of your community, relevant to the particular purpose area that you're applying for, and think about what your service mission is to provide for the community and what those needs are for the community that have revealed themselves that you're trying to address. And above all, you should have some sort of a vision for what the desired outcomes are for your project that are reflective of your community's values. The elements of strategic planning include a vision and a mission statement, identifying different partnerships. Your purpose area activities will all include your ability to apply for or include in your purpose area narrative strategic planning within that purpose area, or development of different projects that you want to implement, and that should be reflective of the partnerships that you have, both internally within your tribal department, within the tribal community, and possibly external partners such as other jurisdictions, other service providers within the county or the state that you're working with. Aspects of your planning will include a needs assessment to determine, is what you're proposing to do actually going to be reflective of the needs that your community has? Does the data that you've collected reflect that there are needs that you want to address through your application of these purpose areas? And are your goals, objectives, strategies, and activities all aligned with what those needs are and what the data is showing? Are what you're planning to do they make sense based on what the data has shown you? Think about a communication plan and how you're going to solicit assistance from other program areas, other professionals within your justice system. Think about how you're going to announce to the community what you're trying to do for improvement, so that when you do have your needs assessment and you might have them answer questionnaires or participate in interviews or focus groups, that they'll understand the importance and the value of their participation, because your projects, the things that you do, can make a difference in your community's quality of life. Think about your evaluation plan. I know that was one of the questions that we asked you in the poll, is are performance measures something that you're concerned with about developing? So your evaluation plan should include whatever it is that you're proposing. How will you know if you're successful? How will you know that it's meeting the needs that you've identified in your data collection and your needs assessment process? And again, think about how you're going to sustain this project or the program that you're trying to develop or enhance. And the reason why that's important is not only is it asked on many of the templates for each purpose area, but just know that sustainability is more than just the continuation of the funds. It does involve those partnerships. It involves how you're going to continue providing the services that you do provide to the community. It might involve the things that you are implementing. How will you be sure that this will go on and continue to go on to meet the needs of the community beyond the life of the grant? Again, with community at the center and the focus, action planning is really just about asking the right questions. And the questions we're going to go over a little bit in your your worksheet on page 2. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But you'll ask the right questions related to the project, the programs, or the services that you provide, and ask the right questions and gather information from the community about what their perceptions are. You'll analyze that information, and you'll look for the gaps between what the current reality is and how they ought to be, or how the community says they ought to be. You'll focus on your strengths within the community, your customs, your traditions, and you'll use those strengths to help to bridge those gaps And if you don't have current strengths, resources, abilities to be able to bridge those gaps, that's where you start to do your action planning and looking for the solutions that these grant proposals can help you to fulfill. So we're going to turn to your workbook now and the situation assessment. So if we start to think about the questions that we want to know, here are some examples. What are the sources of your community's strengths, challenges, and what community resources are available to increase these strengths and decrease the challenges? Now, you might have your own questions that are relevant to the work that you're doing, and so you'll ask those questions. But in page 2 of your workbook, here is a worksheet that you could use. It's just an example of how you would respond to these questions, but get people together within your program area or your department, or people outside of your department who have a perception about what it is that you do. And think about the past situation, how it currently is, and what you want it to look like in the future. What events or happenings have contributed to the blank problems in your community? For example, alcohol or substance misuse in your community. What might that look like? What aspects of your program or people have thrived and have nourished and enriched your community's quality of life? Presently, where are their gaps? And how are they, how could alleviating these gaps be an effective response to the alcohol and substance misuse in the community? What are areas of strength that need to be expanded or developed in response to those things that have been happening in the past? And then for the future, ask the question, if nothing is done to address these issues or challenges, what would happen to your community or to your youth, to your elders, however you want to fill in the blank? What would happen if nothing is done? And what positive forces are working for us that could be leveraged to help you to alleviate or address these issues? Basically, this worksheet on page 2 is just an example of how you would determine what's happened, where are we now, and where do we want to be. These types of guiding questions will give you a focus for your planning efforts. They'll give you a focus that if it's an alignment with the purpose area that you're going to apply for, then it would make sense of how you could possibly address the issues. So your guiding question is going to give you a hypothesis or a theory of this is what we've seen happening and this is why, which should answer those first few questions in your purpose area templates, which is really asking you about what's been happening and why is this a challenge and what have you done to address this in the past, right? So when you're done with this webinar and you have time to meet with your team, ask that question. What is it that we want to know more about related to your particular challenges? And how are you going to find those kinds of answers to these questions? In all things, we encourage a multidisciplinary approach. And what that means is that if I'm working in victim services, that means that what I am doing to assist victims of crime, I'm going to want to ask my justice system partners also, what are they seeing is a challenge or a strength that we do for the victims in our community? What does law enforcement have to say about the programs and the services that I offer? What does treatment say? And how could treatment be a partner for my victim services program that might help our victims of crime, whether it be mental health counseling or whether it be cultural healing, referrals to medical doctors and medical professionals, things of that nature. So a multidisciplinary approach is just getting a perspective from somebody else who sees things differently. And it's important for us to get that kind of perspective because we see things one way in the work that we do for the people that we serve. And that's okay. That's what makes you the professional in that area. That makes you the expert. But if you want to address people in your community's needs from a holistic perspective, and if you want to be able to offer the best services available, then it would make sense that you create a team of other providers and get their perceptions and perspective also. So in this diagram, the center circle would be like your core advisory board. It could be a multidisciplinary team, an MDT. It could be a CCR team or a coordinated community response team. It could be a group of people who you serve, past clients, past graduates of your drug court or something of that nature. But that would be your core advisory board who you might ask for guidance and assistance when you're developing your program enhancements. The second circle would be key stakeholders. So they might be key partners that you do work with to serve the clients that you do, to serve the community members that you serve. Internal people and programs. So maybe a key stakeholder that is an internal program might be if you have like a food sovereignty program, they might be a resource where you could get foods donated so that when you have community meetings or community events or things that are going to promote your program, maybe you could get food donations from them. Or maybe it's the food pantry for your domestic violence shelter. That program could be internal or external, might be a key resource because they're people who reach out and help to sustain your program, your project, or any activities that you offer. So in your workbook on page 4, you're being asked here to identify people, an advisory board member, or whatever you want to title that, it's fine. But it's an opportunity for you to identify people who could be of assistance to assist you in the planning for your project proposal. You would list their title and position and be specific and know and understand what their role and responsibility is, so that when you meet with them and invite them to participate, then they will understand what it is that you're asking them to do. And part of identifying their role and responsibility, you might not know fully until you talk with them and you find out, how much time do you think you might be able to support us? Would you be able to come to an advisory board or a planning meeting, say twice a month for an hour and 15 minutes each meeting? Things like that. Just be prepared to tell them what your expectations are and how you need them. So think about what their skill sets are. One example might be in preparing for your application is somebody who has access to data and information. That might not be me. I am maybe not as savvy about how to pull data from different resources. Maybe you've got somebody who works in information technology or your planning department. They might have those kinds of skill sets that I don't have that would be a critical resource for me in assisting me to getting the information that I need to be able to tell the story to the funding agencies and the peer reviewers about what it is you're trying to do. Think about the people who understand your program area, that they understand and they already support your mission. They're already fans of yours. And think about those people who can make decisions, who can help remove roadblocks, and who have access to other resources that might be a benefit to your project. All of these things that you would write into your application, let's say you're not asking for a particular resource because one of your partners have that resource, it contributes and it demonstrates to sustainability and project support for what you're doing. And that looks really good to peer reviewers and to these agencies that you're requesting funds from, because they can see how people are rallying around you. And so that's just a benefit and a strength of the project that you might be proposing. Here's an example of some partnerships that you might consider. Elders are a wonderful resource, especially when you're trying to determine what your current situation is. They have access and knowledge to what has happened in the past. and what has worked before. And if you're trying to propose another idea of how to alleviate or address the challenges that your community sees, they would be able to tell you, well, this is what works and this is what doesn't work. And if it didn't work before, maybe the situation and the state of your community at the time, it didn't work because of maybe just things not being in place, but maybe now things are different. They could tell you that too. And the elders are also a wonderful resource for getting volunteers to assist with conducting surveys or questionnaires or getting support within your project if there's something that you need to implement. Maybe they're the ones who are sitting down with people in the community to interview or do those focus groups too. So just think about different resources and partnerships that you could build. You can gather information from observations, focus groups. Maybe you have a focus group of, like I said, past clients that you've worked with. Maybe if you're a victim services program and you have a focus group of first responders and law enforcement, you could get their perspective of what they're seeing for the needs of victims when they come on site. Maybe they would have some ideas for you about what kind of training or education that you would want to give to the community so that they're better prepared. Maybe they would have information for you about how to work better and more effectively with them so that when you're called to a scene and you're there to support the victims of a crime, that you will be able to work well with law enforcement and maybe not impede an investigation. You would better understand what their needs are when they have to question witnesses or victims. So things of that nature. Community assessments, they help you understand root causes of problems and challenges. They can help you to understand what's causing the problems, what's making the problems worse, and what is happening to address these problems either in the past or what currently is happening to address these. And then what is missing to effectively address these problems. And it's that last question then that would go into the development of your goals and objectives and action steps. Just something to be mindful of if you're developing or responding to those template questions about, what are the current challenges that you're seeing, be sure to be able to distinguish what the problem is from what the symptoms are. So the nature of a problem that you're seeing in the community, such as alcohol and substance misuse, might manifest itself in symptoms that might be high school dropout rates. It might be a symptom of seeing long wait lists at behavioral health for treatment, inpatient or outpatient treatment. So those are symptoms. The problem itself might be high use, increased use of alcohol and substance misuse as evidenced by, and you might have some data or statistics that can tell you that. Law enforcement might have information that will say this is the number of OWI arrests that we've had, and the schools might say these are the number of students that we've referred to behavioral health because of things that they're experiencing. Data collection and needs assessment. It is figures or statistics that can be collected for analysis, and it will help you in developing an opinion, and it'll help you to paint that picture. It verifies the problems that you're experiencing, that you're noticing, and it takes you away from what is perceived to be a problem to what actually is the problem. And this is what it would be really helpful for you in developing your program narrative, because you'll have a statement that you can make that this is what we're seeing, and then you'll have the data and the facts to back it up. And that's something that the peer reviewers will want to know. Think about what do you need to know, where are you going to get that information, and how do you plan to use that information? And it's really important to be able to identify this, because sometimes when you're gathering information, it's hard to know when to stop gathering information. And if you're surveying the community, you definitely don't want to ask them things and take their time to participate in a questionnaire or a focus group if you're not going to use all of that information? And that's usually a question that they'll have. Well, why are you asking these questions, and how are you going to use this information? Why do you need to know? You can think about creating a list of the data that you'll need to verify that any problem exists. And you should know why that information is important and who's going to get that information. In your worksheet, page 6, there's a template here where you can start to fill in the boxes there. And this can be one of the steps in you developing your timeline for applying for the funding between now and maybe mid-January. You'll want to make sure that you have all of the data collected so that you can effectively respond then to this data once it's analyzed. Before we get too far ahead, I just want to take a step backwards in your workbook, going back to page 4. So when I was talking about the different resources that you might have available to you by identifying who your key stakeholders are, I'd like you to also think about a resource map, a program map, or a case flow map. Now, page 4 has an example for you about, this example is like the police receive a call for service or a report of some criminal activity. And then the next step is that the police would go to investigate. And maybe another resource is that the county police are observing similar activity. So the police launch an investigation. And from that, they might issue a ticket to somebody, or they might arrest a suspect. And you can see how the case flow just branches out from there. Now, the reason why a case flow diagram might be beneficial for you is because when you are looking at a challenge in your community, you can see by a case flow diagram who is involved. And in this example, at the very beginning, we know that there was somebody who reported. We know that it's something that our tribal police department is involved in, and we know that some other partners from other jurisdictions might be involved in it as well. We know that once that ticket is issued or there's an arrest, we know now that tribal courts become involved. And so you can see data points that might arise from a case flow map. You can see who all your stakeholders are through this case flow map. You can see who your justice system partners are that would have to respond to something like this. And you might see areas of opportunity or gaps in this process of where you don't have maybe the appropriate support for a victim in this situation or circumstance. Maybe there is no public defender for a defendant in a case like this. So you can start to get a really clear picture about who your resources are, who your stakeholder partners are, what the data collection points might be, and where the gaps are here. So just to finish up on the data analysis, you can use the case flow map to help you identify this type of data. It can help you to understand any conditions or events that might precede the problem. It can help you to understand just the scope of the problem, like how big is this problem? And it can help you to identify the nature of the problem. What are the consequences of this activity that you're seeing in the community, or what are the consequences of these challenges? What are the consequences for the community? What are the consequences for your project in what you're able to provide or not being able to provide? Think about the harms that might result from your problems or community challenges. How often does the problem occur? How long has this been a problem? What is the duration of each occurrence of these problems or situations? Think about the answer to all of these kinds of questions and come up with your own questions, because these are things that peer reviewers will want to know. Your funding agency will want to know. If you're asking for funding from them because you're saying that you're experiencing XYZ in your community, well, they're going to want to know to what extent, and they're going to want to know how are you going to address these issues. Again, just understanding, are these problems or are these symptoms? How will you respond to them? think about when you're analyzing the data, do we already have services that exist that could address the problem? If yes, identify who they are and how they can be a support to you, how you can be a support to them, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel either, especially when it shows up in your grant program narrative. Think about, do people have access to the services? And how are they getting in touch with people who are service providers? And if there aren't service providers, what could you do to help alleviate these problems? And again, not to reinvent the wheel or duplicate services, but to leverage your ideas with what other services might already exist. And that would be a good demonstration of sustainability too, to identify that you have project partners and resources and that you don't have all of this just on your shoulders. Problem statement, we don't really ask necessarily in the solicitations like for a statement of the problem anymore, but these are still good questions for you to be able to answer so that you clearly understand what the issues are that you're trying to address with this grant funding. Do you have any questions about this aspect of action planning so far?
Thank you, Justine. We do have a question. Our first question is, can a tribally designated 501c3 apply for purpose area number 3? And they noted that this would be in conjunction with the tribe's housing and public safety departments. In this case, tribal health would be the lead, and it happens to have a much lower indirect rate, meaning there would be more funds to address the challenge.
I am going to say that I'm not 100% sure on that, but we can definitely get you an answer. For the person that asked that question, send your exact question to tribalgrants@usdoj.gov, and they will farm that out to Trish Thaxton, who is the person in charge of Purpose Area 3, and she'll be able to answer that for you. There's a small chance you may not get an answer until probably the first week in January. Everyone's starting to disappear for the holidays. But if you go ahead and send that, we'll make sure you get an answer.
That's a great opportunity too. And I really like that you recognize the benefit of working with this nonprofit organization because of their lower indirect rate. It's such a wonderful opportunity if you can get a lot more services provided to the community with that lesser indirect rate. Just remember that whatever you do working with an outside organization, that the tribe has to be that designee, and then you will need to have tribal authorization.
Thank you, Justine and James. And we don't have any additional questions at this time.
So I know I went through that part relatively quickly. I hope that the worksheets are relatively self-explanatory. And again, these are just tools for you. We're going to skip over a little bit on the data collection and needs assessment because we've already talked about that. But you can see also from those examples that there might be some activities or information that you would want to collect based on the case study. That's where my examples come from that are in the worksheets themselves. Once your data is collected and you're able to start to analyze what those results are, there's a worksheet on page 9 of your workbook that explains or that reviews like what are the main issues or themes that you are seeing. It might be actually page 8 that you have. It looks like I had one page that ran over a little bit, but the data analysis worksheet, it asks you to identify 4 main issues or themes that came out of your data collection process. And from those themes, you'll start to identify if these issues are related to justice system challenges that you've already identified. It asks you, are these problems or symptoms? Again, do the services currently exist to address these problems? And are people able to access these? And then some notes. So once you clearly identify where these themes are that you want to address, and perhaps you've even developed like a statement of the problem, or at least a full explanation of what the results are of your needs assessment, you'll start to think about with your team, What positive changes do you want to see now as a result of the efforts for your program? What are the intended results of successful completion of this project? And how are you going to get there? How will you know you've achieved success? And if you can succinctly answer these questions, you won't have a problem at all completing your purpose area templates and responding to those questions. Between your data collection and answering these kind of questions about what it is that you want to see, you're identifying gaps. What is the current condition and what should it be? What is your desired outcome? So these are the things that you want to change, improve, or create. Or maybe it's just enhancing your project or your current activities. The framework for action planning then is whatever you want to do to address those issues, you will create action steps, and the action steps will lead to the completion of an objective. And those objectives, however many there are, should help you reach your goal. And just something to think about, the reason why I only have 4 items or 4 main items or issues that are identified from your data analysis is because if it gets to be more than that, it can be really overwhelming for any one program to address. And if there are main issues that have emerged from your data collection process, think about if they're in alignment with your program area's vision and mission. If they're not completely in alignment, maybe these are issues identified that are best served or being addressed by another program area. And they might be something that's important to you, but peripheral to your mission and vision. So just focus on something that is in alignment with what it is that you do for your justice system and for your community. Most tribal nations have a vision, and most tribal departments, including justice system components, have maybe an individual vision that is also in alignment with your nation's vision. So just something to be aware of, that you want these things to be in alignment with each other to support your program with the tribal nation vision, so that you're not competing against anything else that's happening in the community. It inspires your work group. It's like that desired outcome, the overarching goals that you want to do. A vision might not necessarily be achieved in your lifetime. However, a practical vision as it relates to your grant application is something that should be more realistic, and that could be manifested in your goals and how you develop the goals for your project. Here's an example of a vision: a nation of healthy and strong future leaders, guided by traditional values and self-worth to make educated and informed decisions in their daily lives. So this is a vision that, let's say I was addressing an issue or challenge of alcohol and substance misuse in my community. If I use my purpose area application to support the services that my program area provides, wouldn't it make sense that if we address alcohol and substance misuse, that someday we could achieve this vision of healthy and strong future leaders? A mission is an operational statement. It's easily understood, and it's almost like what you might have heard of, like a 20-second elevator speech. Oh, well, this is the project that I'm working on, and this is why we work on this. You know, it's something that really could get people on board with you and in support of what it is that you're trying to do. It briefly describes what will be done so that you can achieve your goals. It answers the why you do what you do. It's stated in general terms, so it's not anything to do with your action planning yet, a goal or an objective, but generally you want to maybe alleviate the challenges of substance use and misuse. It's not necessarily time limited, and it should serve just for an extended period of time, like for the work that you're doing in your project for the next 5 years, let's say. The mission answers these questions, and you'll find that in your workbook, in your worksheets, mission statement, and it asks, who you are, what you do, who do you do it for, and how will you do it. So going back to your vision, this nation of healthy and strong future leaders, you might want to have a mission of alleviating substance use and misuse so that you can grow strong and future leaders of your young people. Here's an example. Our mission is to develop trauma-informed approaches to education, interventions, and preventative programs to address adolescent alcohol and substance abuse within our school. So this is an example of a mission that's tied to the case study example that you have in your handouts. It shows clearly what you're going to do, trauma-informed approaches. You're going to have education, interventions, and preventative programs. And who are you going to do it for? It's going to be for the adolescents within our school system. Your mission should be understood by the people on your team, and that includes your advisory board members. And your mission should be in alignment with your desired outcomes and your vision also. And in this example of the two arrows here, organization 1, you can see that all of the members within this organization, they're generally going in the same direction, but as individuals, these people might have their own agenda. And so they might be slightly out of alignment with the organization's overall mission. So if you were to extend those green arrows over time, you'll see that people start getting spread out and probably further and further away from each other and from the proposed mission of the single organization. In organization 2, you can see that all of the team members are all aligned in the same direction as the organization. And an example of this might be these green arrows could be your multidisciplinary team, your MDT or your CCR. So those individuals, of course, they have other priorities because they all serve other organizations or another department. And that's part of why you want that multidisciplinary perspective and approach. However, if they're serving your organization as an advisory board member, then they need to clearly understand your mission, because when they're sitting at your table, then they're in support of you. They'll still have the perspective that they bring with them from their profession and their professional experience and their community experience. But we really want everyone to be in alignment with what it is that you are trying to do so that you can really optimize the grant dollars that you're applying for and any of the other activity that you do within your organization. So in your vision and your mission on your worksheet, just think about a few key words or phrases that you can build upon as you develop your project proposal if you don't already have a vision and mission for your organization. But it's important that you have these key words or phrases because they're going to start to pop up all throughout your grant application and your proposal. The peer reviewer will be able to see what it is that you value, what is it that you're trying to address with this grant funding. Action planning, program design, and implementation. So your desired outcome is the overarching things that you want to see being the result of your efforts. It's part of a generalized expression of what your mission is to do, and it helps to bridge your vision and mission. Now, not everybody would use a desired outcome in a project proposal. The reason why I have it here is because I find that oftentimes people get confused between what is a goal and what is an objective. And if we just simply state in general terms, well, I want to alleviate underage drinking in my community, that might be misconstrued as a goal, which alleviating underage drinking in my community as a goal it would be really challenging to create very actionable items or plans to implement a project around that. If I use it in a general term as my overarching desired outcome, that starts to give me more direction without being challenged to, well, how do I even start to address that? It's a really big issue, if you know what I mean. So it helps you to just align your thoughts of what it is you want to do to what your mission is. An example of a desired outcome: to prevent our youth from alcohol and drug misuse in the schools and to end their self-destructive behaviors. So that might be my overarching desired outcome. And you're going to see now that we're going to start getting more and more specific as we start working through the action planning. So a goal would be a statement of intended results or outcomes that you want to see. And it translates your vision and mission into what realistically can be accomplished. And you'll see, like from the desired outcome again, we want to prevent this activity, and more specifically, it's in the schools because we want to end self-destructive behaviors. Again, I didn't say like how we were going to do it yet, but this is overall, this is what we want to do. And the goal then is going to be what we hope to accomplish based on the needs that are identified from your data collection process. Here's an example of a goal. Adopt a culture of trauma-informed approach to address adolescent substance abuse. Establish education, prevention, and intervention programming based on cultural and traditional values. This goal is a little bit more specific than my overarching desired outcome to prevent youth from alcohol and drug misuse in the schools. So these goals could potentially lead to achieving our desired outcome. And you should be able to see the connection between all of these statements as you go. So these are generalized statements, generalized of the intended outcomes, and you can tell from these goals yet, I still don't say yet how we're going to achieve these goals. So those goals are like the top of the stairs. You want to get to that second floor landing. We don't say in a goal how we're going to do that yet. How we're going to do that is through the objectives. The objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and they're timely or time-bound. These objectives are more like the staircase, the stairs that we take to reach those goals. They describe how to achieve goals. They describe what will be accomplished or completed within a certain time period, because they're time-bound, and they do address identified problems. So the objectives should be clearly steps to achieve our goals. Our goals should be a clear, actionable thing that would alleviate the identified problems. They're all connected. So in this example, using our case study, I shared with you goal 1, some objectives within that goal: decrease the alcohol and drug abuse incidents at the school by half by the end of the first semester and eliminate these incidents by the end of the school year. The second objective: implement restorative practices and traditional activities in school disciplinary protocols and curricula at the beginning of the school year and ongoing. So you can see from this example that these objectives describe specifically what is going to be done. They are measurable. We're going to decrease alcohol and drug abuse incidents by half. It's time bound. We're going to have a 50% reduction by the end of the first semester, and then we're going to have an elimination of all of these incidents by the end of the school year. So that's time bound. Are they realistic? I hope so. We're going to find out, I think, more so through our action steps. Objective 2, implement restorative practices and traditional activities. So specifically, there are things that are going to be introduced into the school, and especially through disciplinary protocols. and in curriculum. So we're going to do make some changes. We're not going to make school behavior or students' behavior, we're not going to address them as punitively for alcohol and substance abuse. We want to have more restorative practices, right? And we're going to do this at the beginning of the school year and ongoing. So that's part of how timely it is. Getting more specific now, your activities and your tasks will tell you how you are going to achieve those objectives. They will also be specific in that it should identify the person responsible for achieving this, and it's also time bound. And when you're grant writing, if you don't have a person specifically identified, then at least have the position identified and explain why you don't have the person in place yet. So maybe you're going to be hiring somebody for this. And if you're going to be hiring anybody, of course, that person's salary will be included in the budget. The description of what they do will be in the budget narrative and the program narrative, and you will have an attachment of a job description for this person. Always think about how the activities connect to the objectives, to the goals, and will it meet or address the issues that have been identified? Is it aligned with our mission? And is this approach financially possible? If it's not aligned with your goals and your mission, then again, maybe it's activity that it sounds like it might be a good idea, but maybe it's a better activity for a different entity, a different department. And you have to be able to afford it within the grant budget. And hopefully it's something that could be sustained even if the grant dollars end after 3 to 5 years. So again, some examples. For goal 1, objective 1 was to decrease the alcohol and drug abuse incidents at the school by half. Okay, so an activity to achieve that objective, identify the multidisciplinary team members and resources and invite them to participate in monthly meetings. So we're going to pull together through this activity a committee that's going to be able to develop and implement this curriculum. Activity B, commit to shared agreements and establish the scope of the MDT. Activity C, design and implement interventions to at-risk youth at the school on a weekly basis. And then the staff identified are the principal, a substance abuse counselor, law enforcement, probation, and a chairman or a designee. And when thinking about the stakeholder circle of support, we have people here identified for the staff needed. These are people who can make things happen. They can make sure that resources are supplied. Space in the school is going to be accessible for all of the program activity. You're working with law enforcement because some of these kids who've gotten in trouble because of substance misuse are in trouble perhaps with law enforcement as well as with the school. And then you're talking to probation because if these kids have been adjudicated in the past, you want to work in a restorative aspect with their probation officer, things like that. So this is just an example. It's probably not an exhaustive list of activities that you could do, and it's certainly not an exhaustive list of all the staff that are needed, but this would be the staff perhaps for just these activities related to objective 1.1. You'll see more examples in the case study handout. Do you have any questions on the action planning portion? We've reviewed mission and vision. We've reviewed what a goal is, how objectives are SMART objectives that support the goals, and we've also identified more specific activities or tasks that would achieve the objectives. And just to let you know too, you will see goals and objectives used interchangeably by people sometimes. And really, whatever you call them, it doesn't matter to the peer reviewer as long as you're consistently using the terms for the same types of activities. So if you want to say that your goals, like everything is your goal, that's okay, but just make sure that you've got the appropriate activities laid out in your timeline so that you'll achieve those goals, whether those goals are objectives or interchangeable or vice versa.
Great information, Justine.
Just so that you know, a lot of people might be asking or wondering, why are we talking about action planning when I just want advice on how to write my purpose area narrative for CTAS? And the reason why is because if you go through a process of planning, it doesn't have to be the one I'm outlining for you. It just has to make sense for you and your team. If you take the time to develop this process, you'll have a fully fleshed out plan in place. You'll clearly be able to respond to those template questions about what the issues are that you're seeing. You'll have evidence and data to support why these are problems for your community, and you'll have a clear plan to implement your project should you get funded. And as a peer reviewer, I've read a lot of proposals that have really outstanding ideas of what is to be done. And I can see where, sometimes I can see where the community really needs it and can benefit from it. But if there's not a well laid out plan about how to implement the project, like I said, and you should be able to hand your plan or your timeline over to somebody who's never seen your project before. And if it's written concisely, they should be able to follow every step and they could implement that plan or that project for you. That's how clearly we want these to be written out. And when you're writing this project, you all have been doing what you're doing for a long time, I'm sure. And I'm sure you have a vision for if only you had additional resources, you could do ABC. Because you have that vision in your mind so clearly, it's not always clear to other people who are reading it or seeing your vision for the first time on paper. So it's to your benefit to have other people review and read what your plan is so that they get it, so that they understand it as clearly as you understand it in your own mind, in your own vision. So we're going to move over to evaluation and sustainability. And the reason why we talk about evaluation and sustainability is because it's a requirement for you on your CTAS application, of course, but it's really important that you be able to identify an evaluation plan so that you will know when your goals and objectives have been achieved. So it's a step further actually than like performance measures, which might ask or might respond to, well, who are the number of participants that we had engaged in this, in these activities at the school? How many were satisfied or better or more satisfied with the programming that you've offered? You know, it's beyond the performance measures. It's really, are you doing what you said you were going to do? Are we helping the people we thought we would be helping? And you want to be able to respond to these kinds of evaluative questions so that you know how to adjust where your resources are, so that you know how to maybe clarify policies or procedures or expectations. Just make some adjustments to your project so that everybody is benefiting from it to the best of your ability and your resources available. So in evaluation, there are qualitative and quantitative and mixed method methodology. You want to satisfy the funding agency's requirements. You'll document program accomplishments, justify why your program is so effective and needed in your community, and validate the proposed goals and objectives and activities that you have. These are all reasons for evaluation, and there's probably a lot of others too that you can think of. It will help you to promote program accountability and sustainability. When you have effective evaluation of your project or activities, it's a really great thing to be able to update your division directors or your council about the impact that you're having on the community. It does help you with sustainability because people will know the results of how valuable you are and the activities that you're offering. So you can think about goals-based evaluation. Are we meeting our goals? Are we meeting them by the time we thought we would meet those goals? Process-based evaluations. Are we reaching the people we thought we would reach? Are we being effective with the education or prevention activities that we're putting out there to the community? Are they good activities, or in the process, are people just finding that they aren't able to attend your activities because they don't have transportation or things of that nature? And then the outcomes-based evaluation. Have we seen the reductions in alcohol and substance abuse or misuse that we thought we would? What are the outcomes of our activities? So those are the different types of evaluation that you can use. And you can use quantitative or qualitative. Numeric, quantitative are all about the numbers, and qualitative are the stories that are told. What is the quality of the product or the courses or the activities that you're having? Again, the quantity or the quantitative, how many people are coming? How many people are using our services? Qualitative, are they satisfied? Are they finding value in what you do? Mixed method would be a combination of both, and you really do want both. When you're demonstrating in your community and justice profile what the issues are that are surrounding your community, you want the scope of the problem, which is the quantitative, and you want to explain the nature of the problems. That's qualitative. You can use surveys, talking circles, other forms of focus groups or community forums, needs assessment questionnaires, surveys or evaluations of programs. There's all different kinds of collection tools that you can use, and they don't have to be long. They just have to ask the right questions, and we talked about that quite a bit earlier in data collection. In data analysis, what are the gaps in services identified? In what ways do the findings validate what's working well? Because in project evaluation, you really want to be able to celebrate successes. What are those emerging themes? What I want to know too is, what are some unexpected outcomes from the activities that you're doing? What are those, besides the success of maybe meeting those numbers, like a reduction in substance abuse, underage substance abuse by half in the school year, what are some unexpected things? Are you seeing peer-to-peer mentoring? Are you seeing adults becoming more engaged with their youth? Are you seeing more participation? Are you seeing an increase in grades by the students participating in your project? Think about also those unexpected outcomes. Again, success can be measured in those performance measures that all of your grant applications will have to respond to. And a lot of the even grant reporting that you might experience now, if you have current projects, they all want to know numbers. But it's just so important to also include that qualitative data. Think about in your data collection or your evaluation, what will be measured, what data will be collected, who's responsible for collecting the data, and how is success defined. Think about the data as it relates to the project needs. List all of your data on the chart. So I have a chart for you too in your worksheets. That's all going to page, it's either 14 or 15 on your chart. But that's going to help you to identify how you're going to measure the success of and the impact of your project. Moving on to sustainability. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It is a question on your purpose area application templates. This information on your worksheets will help you to identify ways other than monetarily that you can plan for sustainability. As a peer reviewer, when I see people respond to a question about sustainability that we're going to apply for more grant funding, that's not a plan for sustainability. That's not an indication of what do you value the most about your project and what has to continue for the benefit of your community. Think about, what would the community look like if your program or your proposal, your idea to support your community had everything it needed to function? and what factors or what things came up in your needs assessment or in your evaluation that you really need to strive to address. The evaluation of your project is going to help you to understand what's working the best and what needs to be addressed or adjusted. It helps you to ensure that your project will continue. It will help you to set program priorities. What I mean by that is when you evaluate your project and your proposal, if you're not finding, or if the community isn't finding a lot of value in one of your activities, but they are in another, that's a great opportunity for you to shift your energy and activities and resources over to what is really getting a great response, and to look at what's maybe not getting as great of a response or having as great of an impact. Is it not having as great of an impact because of access or time of day that you might offer different services, or is it because it's just not as useful as some other activities that you're doing? Don't keep feeding your energy into things that just aren't working, but be very critical about how you determine if it's not working or not, because some things are problems while other things are just symptoms that can be easily alleviated. It helps you to also determine the action that your program needs to respond to those gaps, and it can help to build your project capacity. So sustainability is really important in a lot of these ways. Think about who might be interested in helping you in your program area to continue your activities when the funding ends. Again, those stakeholders that you've identified are so important to know and understand. You really want to share with them what's working well, what they can help you with, and how it'll benefit them and you, and of course the community. Think about those other tribal departments, not-for-profits, community coalitions, and think about creating your own nonprofit organization. When you're identifying areas to sustain, the 4 main areas, and you might have ideas of others, but think about your services that you provide, the staff who provide those services, the cost for those services, the cost for your staff salary, cost even for time and the energy that it takes, and the resources that you need to be able to provide those services, or the resources that you're providing to the community. These are all aspects that you want to look for. You could conduct like a SCOT analysis: strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats. Always review your goals and objectives to be sure that the goals and objectives are still addressing those challenges or threats that you'd previously identified. And ask your team, are we doing all that we can to leverage our resources and partnerships to achieve these goals and objectives? Because those resources and partnerships might be a no-cost resource for you to be able to continue providing the services that you do. Are there any questions about sustainability or program evaluation?
Great information, Justine. We do have a question for you, and that is, what if the project requires more activities past the life of the grant?
If the project requires more activities past the life of the grant, if those activities can be continued without the grant funding, explain in your narrative how those activities are going to be maintained moving forward and for how long you expect that you be able to maintain that. It would tell the peer reviewer and the funding agency that you're going to be able to get a great outcome for just this initial investment of your 3 to 5 year grant. I think that's a wonderful way to demonstrate sustainability. If those activities, if you want those activities to continue beyond the life of the grant, and at this point you don't think that you can afford to maintain those activities beyond the life of the grant, I would identify other resources or partnerships that might be able to help take over some of those responsibilities so that all aspects of your project don't just die at the end of the closure of your grant. It's really hard to create sustainability or longevity for your project and to justify that it'll be beneficial with the outcomes that you expect if it's only going to die without all of the grant funding, if that makes sense. I hope I answered that effectively for you.
Thank you, Justine.
Okay, I'm going to wrap then this portion. Just a reminder that you've got that case study handout. It gives you some ideas about what action planning might look like. The case study would be an example too of what happens after you've fully done a needs assessment to understand the scope and the nature of the problem. So the examples that are in that case study for goals and objectives and action steps are only examples. I just made these up with my colleague Leah, who works on strategic planning projects with me. So of course, I mean, don't look at them too critically because we just created them as an example, but do know that your peer reviewers are going to be looking at your project critically, and you want to make sure that your activities, objectives, and the goals you want to achieve are all in alignment with what your desired outcome is or those problems that you've identified that you want to address. The sustainability worksheets in your workbook, you can fill those out on your own. In the workbook, you'll identify what your vision and goals are in the middle of that circle. And then you're going to think about what are all the things that we can do to foster commitment from the community, from leadership, from our partners to sustain this project. Step 2, identify and clarify expectations. Everybody working on the project, everybody representing your advisory board should clearly understand what is expected of their role and responsibility. And if they don't understand all of those things, then you might want to address your policies, your procedures, protocols, so that it's understood by everybody. Build momentum for change. Demonstrate to the community, to your the funding agent, to tribal council certainly, that your project is having an impact, and here's how it's having an impact. And then in step 4, instill capacity for change. Think about all of the aspects of the project that you've implemented. Identify how you can cross-train people, how you can get them training or professional development experience so that everyone is fully aware of the functions of your program and how it works, so that other people can do it too if we were to lose staff because of staff turnover, or if the funding does go away. People are cross-trained. People might have other ideas of how they can pick up and fill in those gaps and continue to do the activities of your project that are being implemented, even if the funding goes away. And the last worksheet regarding sustainability is really for you to think about your project functioning, the staff, the costs. What do you need to make sure that all of the functions and the staff are supported, and what can you realistically live without and what can't you live without? This is the conclusion of the action planning part of building strong grant applications. For those of you who have seen advertised the Accessing Grants workshop that's going to be held in January in Anchorage or in Phoenix, this is basically the same presentation that you will see there for that day-and-a-half workshop. That's how much we believe in this, and hope that you will find value in it too. And just so that you know, we do still have space in the Anchorage workshop. So at this time, I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to James.
Thank you, Justine. Next slide, please. Before we go to the next slide, we're just gonna spend a little bit of time talking about funding opportunities, other funding opportunities, training, and technical assistance resources. So the next slide, please. So if you're interested in other OJP funding opportunities, and OJP consists of offices like Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is BJA, the Office of Victims of Crime, which is OVC, and the Office of Juvenile Justice, Delinquency, and Prevention, JJ, you could go to the OJP funding website. For COPS, their funding website is listed there, and as well as OVW's other funding opportunities. You know, while CTAS is meant to have the majority of the tribal department's tribal funding in there. It's not all. So each office certainly has other solicitations and funding ops that may be available to tribes. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Next slide, please. Grants.gov is another resource that I implore all of you to sign up for. It's a way to have your ear to the street on the latest RFPs and solicitations that may be available under agencies that you're interested in, under topic areas. You can set up alerts and receive RSS feeds and social media hits on all of the solicitations and funding opportunities. Definitely encourage you to sign up for that. The tribalyouthprogram.org funding opportunities for CTAS. So I encourage you to look at this too. It will focus on some of the things that JJ offers, but it's also a good resource to see what funds can be used in different ways under the coordinated tribal assistance solicitation as well. The next site is another good tool for you to use. I won't insult you by reading this, but certainly when this is made available, I encourage you to refer back to the slide and go to this site, which for those of you who may be only listening by phone, the site is www.ncjtc.org/on-demand. But we will be making this available in a few weeks, but this is another great resource for you as well. And it deals with strategic planning process. Technical assistance. Each office, every time we make these awards each year and decide who's going to get funded, each of our offices have a host of TA providers that are available to assist you with your training and technical assistance needs. This website will show you the areas that they are by topic. I know for OBW, we have a host. If you get a tribal government program grant, our comprehensive TA providers, Mending the Sacred Hoop, or MISH as we call them, and I oversee them. And then we also, if you do transitional housing through the tribal government program, Wetland Consulting is our transitional housing and children and youth TA provider, which I also oversee them. And Fox Valley Technical College does a lot for a lot of our offices across the board, especially with Purpose Area 2 and a lot with the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So they are another great resource. But I encourage you to look at this link to get more information. And the neat thing is some of our TA providers can provide assistance to you, even if you aren't awarded or you don't currently have an award. So that's a great thing as well. Continuing on, just some of the areas that we have TA providers or resources in are Indian alcohol and substance abuse, law enforcement, tribal courts, tribal civil and criminal legal assistance, corrections, alternatives to incarceration and reentry, juvenile delinquency prevention, and juvenile justice. Other areas they can assist in: victim services, intergovernmental collaboration, information sharing, Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, and domestic and sexual violence crime, as well as sexual assault, stalking, and cyber stalking, and sex trafficking. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but if you're having any technical issues with getting registered with GMS or submitting your applications, this is the information that you want to have handy. For those of you who really like using your phones a lot, I would snap a picture of this and have this information handy. Next slide, please. For programmatic assistance, as I said, the Response Center is kind of like a call center for all things CTAS. They have a lot of resource documents there that we provided to them that you can also get off of the CTAS website, but they will be able to get you in direct contact with the POC for any particular purpose area, or if it's something a little bit more technical that they can't handle. Next slide.
And we have another poll question. The question is, I feel I am prepared to write a successful grant application. Options are yes, no, or I feel like I need more training. And from our responses, as you can see, we have 54 responses saying, or 54% saying yes, 43% sharing they feel like they need more training, and 4% sharing no.
Just a few other things to cover. As we mentioned, we will be having some additional webinars coming up. There's a variety of webinars, and if you refer to the Tribal Justice and Safety website for a detailed schedule there, as well if you're signed up for our site, we often email out reminders about that, so you'll get that information. But we mentioned the budget worksheet completion workshop that we want you to pay special attention to, as well as the final webinar because we know when you get in that home stretch, kind of getting some of those last minute lingering things answered is very important. And of course, any previous held webinars, the one that took place yesterday, the one today, give us a few weeks and all of those will be sent out and posted online. Next slide.
That's the last slide.
Okay. Well, at this time, we want to open it up for any questions that anyone may have about anything that we've covered today.
Great. Thank you, James and Justine. Do any of our presenters have any additional tips or information they would like to share?
Nothing else from me at this point. I think other than, just the basic things, make sure that when you're loading up documents that you use the file names that we use and the names that we call documents in the solicitation or something that's easily recognizable. Pay attention to the file types. In the solicitation, we use the file types that are acceptable. If you're experiencing technical issues or late submissions, please follow the instructions to a T. And again, don't wait till the last minute. If you are not planning on submitting your application electronically and you need to do it old school, you need to reach out to the Response Center by January 24th to get instructions on how that would work. And then, as I said before, there are some documents that would prevent you from moving forward in the process. If you don't turn in a purpose area narrative for each purpose area in which you're applying for, a budget, for community, tribal, and justice profile, you will not be able to press the submit button. That is the way that the system is set up last year. It's done that way to help prevent you from forgetting to include something important that could affect your chances of getting funded. While that is a great tool, it is not foolproof. So if you just submit upload random documents into those slots, the computer won't be able to tell what they are. It'll just know that you submitted something, so it'll let you move forward. So you still have to triple check to make sure that if you're trying to upload a budget, that is in fact the budget. If you're trying to load a purpose area narrative for purpose area 1, 3, and 5, that is indeed those appropriate narratives, and that your tribal community justice profile is indeed your tribal community justice profile and not someone's resume. So it's, while the system is designed to help, it's not foolproof. You still have to pay attention and not rush. I think that's probably about it for me.
Thank you, everyone, for hanging with us. I know this was a very long webinar, and we hope that this information has been helpful to you.
Thank you, Justine, and thank you, James. It appears we have no additional questions. Are there any final comments you'd like to share?
I am good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys.
Thank you, and we want to thank everyone for joining us. We hope you can join us for future fiscal year 2020 CTAS webinars. A list of